And welcome back to Block TV, where it is time for Power Blocks. Thomas Lee. Thomas Lee's our man. He's a well-known equity strategist with a prolific experience in finances from JP Morgan Chase for nearly a decade to his own highly respected FundStart Global Advisors company. Lee's a man that the investing masses, or 1% if you may, listen to. Now, a controversial advisor, some would say, he is famous for becoming secularly bullish on equities in 2009, recommending recovery in housing by 2012, and arguing that by 2016, the reset of credit scores would seriously boost demand, which indeed was the case. So Lee's a man to listen to. Now, recently, he has brought his focus onto the cryptocurrencies and blockchain, as the innovation of this area looks like a rejuvenation of the industrial/technological revolution, one may say. And he's joining us today from none other than the Big Apple, New York, New York, for a conversation with us. And of course, with us as well, Orla Kai-Cohen, Vice President of BitTax and an expert on digital asset regulation. Great to have both of you with us today. Mr. Lee, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. I want to start with the first question, which is essentially a tweet of yours from, I believe it's of this week. It's possible, I'm quoting you, crypto has peaked. If there is no room for future adoption, it's mature. We estimate the fewer than 500,000 people worldwide use Bitcoin. Is this as good as it gets for decentralized trust and native digital stores of value and payments? It's possible. So, Mr. Lee, I'm wondering with you, first of all, that's kind of a detrimental assessment of the Bitcoin sphere. Do you believe there are only 500,000 people dabbling in that currency?
Yeah, I think one of the unpopular opinions that we carry, and there's several, is I think people are overestimating how many people are using and transacting with Bitcoin today. You know, I think there's estimates as high as 50 million, but I think those estimates reflect those who might have been buying Bitcoin in 2017 but have since really abandoned it because the price has fallen. So I think 500,000, yes, is probably a more realistic number.
That's kind of a frightening thing, I think, for everybody in the sphere, but stock markets continue to climb. There's so much talk about recession, and many people in the sphere believe that a recession is a good thing for, I'm talking about Bitcoin or for cryptocurrencies. First of all, I myself just got back from the States, a lot of chatter in mainstream media about the possibility of a recession. That said, I think the governing party would argue otherwise. What do you think? Is the U.S. heading towards a recession?
No, I think the classic measures of a recession really are really twofold. One is, you exhaust the labor pool, so unemployment markets get too tight. But we've had plenty of job growth without wage pressure, so I think there's still a lot of slack. But the second is really that investment spending typically exceeds 27% of the economy, because that's a lot of speculative spending, whether it's on infrastructure or by companies. And today it's only at 24. So by every conventional measure, since World War II, the US would look mid-cycle. I think the reason there's a lot of recession fears talk is there are problems, the economy's globally slowed, but I also think that there's an agenda. I think because the current president of the US is not necessarily popular with other political parties, there's an incentive for people to think there's a recession, or at least raise the fears, because that actually sways the elections in 2020.
Fascinating. That's almost like saying that, that there's an agenda to make people think that way. Let's go back though to our sphere, cryptocurrencies. There is talk of institutional entry into the crypto market. Needless to say, we're going to touch on Libra in a second. Do you see a future where pension funds will invest in Bitcoin? It's yet to happen, as part of their portfolio. And why hasn't it happened thus far?
Yes. Yeah, I think that cryptocurrencies are ultimately going to be an asset class. But it's really constrained today. And it comes back to the first question you asked me. If there's only 500,000 users of Bitcoin, the market is just simply too small to matter to institutional investors. It's going to matter more when there's 50 million people using Bitcoin every day. And from a sort of size of the asset class, the equity markets today are $66 trillion. The bond market is like 86 trillion. Those are the size of markets pension funds are kind of interested in it, and private equity is over 20 trillion. So when you look at something like Bitcoin, which is 200 billion, it's simply too small. It's less than 0.1% of the investable universe, and it's too small today.
It's too small today. It's also unregulated. Or this one is to you. What regulation is missing? Because, you know, you and I live in this sphere, so to speak. Everybody's waiting for that futures. We'll touch on back in a second. But what regulation is missing to see a pension fund adopted?
Yeah,
So,
I think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'll start with Ora and then I'll go to you.
Sorry.
Yeah, but it's interesting me to see what you're going to say about what I'm going to say. So
No, shoot.
So what I think is that the big problem is the regulation part, because institutions cannot go into a market that is not fully regulated. The crypto exchanges are not fully regulated. The SEC did not provide us with a clear guidance on what is a utility, what is a security. They don't know where to put their money, and the insurance company cannot insure the crypto atmosphere ecosystem because it's too expensive for them. So there is no insurance. And all of those factors are preventing the institutional, to begin with, to show some interest in this market.
No, entirely. No, but that said, BACT finally did launch Bitcoin futures, and it didn't, you know, dare I use the word, you know, it launched with a lot of promise and turned out to be slightly flaccid. Okay, I'm using a term. Mr. Lee, and in that respect, you know, everybody was waiting for BACT. What happened there?
I think that BACT is a pretty unique product because it involves one-day physical delivery of Bitcoin. And for an institution, that's really only going to be attractive if you want to actually acquire Bitcoin outright, or in the case of using custody, you can work with BACT. But it's been easier for institutions to trade Bitcoin through the CME because you still have the option of actually, even though most of the contracts are settled with cash, you have the option of taking physical delivery of Bitcoin. So I think BACT is really reflecting the true institutional volume of funds that want to accumulate Bitcoin. Now, miners would like to use that, the BACT exchange, to actually sell some of their block rewards, but they're primarily doing it through the CME.
And you know what, I'm asking in apropos BACT, and that is just because we were dealing with it so much here. Many were trying, op-eds and Forbes were trying to correlate the recent drop in Bitcoin price, which has been dancing around 8,000 over the course of the last several weeks since that so-called crash from 11, that BACT hype, or, you know, was, and then
Sure.
the dump was part of that drop. Would you agree with that?
I think it's part of it, but it really reflects a broader issue, and we've been writing about it to our clients, that in July, Bitcoin's enthusiasm, which we measure through this thing called Bitcoin Misery Index, it measures what we believe is the perception of a holder of Bitcoin, reached a level that you've only seen a handful of times in the last 10 years, and it means buyers were overly optimistic. So we actually went risk off on Bitcoin in July, because we actually think sentiment is too ebullient and it needs to reset. So part of that sort of over enthusiasm was probably BACT, but, you know, realistically, I think Bitcoin just needs to consolidate its gains. It's made a big move at the start of this year. I don't think anyone should think Bitcoin is a broken protocol. And just, you know, from a regulatory perspective, I know we have many institutional investors that are interested in following Bitcoin, but they can't get involved with size until there's more liquidity and it's larger. But regulatory issues are not as important, believe it or not, because, as you know, Bitcoin is recognized as legal tender and forms of payment in over 100 countries. Right. And even in the US, it's really been recognized and it's treated as a commodity.
No, very true points. Or to you, what is BACT's regulatory advantage at this point?
Well, first of all, is the insurance and the regulated storage. The storage is regulated under the New York State Department of Financial Services, which is something new in the crypto atmosphere, and also the insurance of the wallet, the crypto wallet, which we haven't seen that before. The KYC and the AML process are very strict in a bank level and not in a crypto exchanges level. And there is one more advantage, which is the reports. No exchange will send you reports that are important to institutional investors, and they are providing you with all the tools that institutional needs in order to actually come into crypto regulatory way, which maybe it's not the important part of it, you're right, but it's a great platform, it's a great tool, but it's only one Bitcoin. For an institution, it's a very, very small volume. What I believe, this is a pilot.
Is that why institutions are not biting, do you think, Mr. Lee?
Yes, I mean, really for an institution, like when, we have over 150 clients in 16 countries, and they're all, about half of them are hedge funds and the other half are traditional long-only managers. They like to actually get involved with markets where they can do things like statistical arbitrage, stat arb between exchanges, do other sort of curve trades, and Bakkt, if the volumes aren't there, they're going to be trading through, either spot exchanges or the CME. I think Bakkt over time is going to actually gain critical mass and really be one where you start to see stat arb and other strategies employed. But today, I wouldn't call it a disappointment. I think it's just too early to judge the success of Bakkt.
I tend to agree. I think that's one of the issues with hype. We got to turn to the elephant, not just in the room, but I would say, in Washington right now and globally, and that would be Libra. We're all speaking here a day before Mark Zuckerberg goes up the hill, so to speak, to stand in front of a congressional committee to try and defend this very, very, very ambitious project that's taking a lot of changes and shapes. First of all, Mr. Lee, I'm wondering with you, what do you think about Libra?
I think it's a really thoughtfully designed and actually pretty well articulated project. I know it's not popular with a lot of the original cryptocurrency and digital asset founders because it's somewhat centralized, or the level of decentralization is not similar to Bitcoin. But I think it's a really important way to introduce movement of digital assets and money for people who aren't banked. I mean, Facebook is a huge platform. They've got over 2 billion users. But I think that they've obviously had some missteps in terms of getting this in front of Washington and regulators a little late in the process. And I think that's the process they're dealing with.
No, it's a fascinating thing that you're saying, or with us as well. There was a report that came out that David Marcus, head of Libra, in this conference that he was in, was giving a statement about the possibility of changing the essence of Libra, that it's not backed by a basket of coins as we've originally thought to believe, but rather it would be a stable coin that's pegged to specific currencies such as the US dollar and the EU. And the euro. Do you think that this is because regulators are on his back? Because this is a battle. This is a big battle going on.
Well, I don't think that Libra's point of view, or should I say, its goal was to begin with to be the Federal Reserve. They wanted the coin, they wanted the utility to serve their clients. They wanted to have a full adoption of cryptocurrency of their own. They wanted to bank the unbanked poor child from Africa.
From Africa.
And this was their goal. They did not wish to replace the US dollar. They certainly did not wish to replace the Federal Reserve. So they did a smart thing. They are testing the water. They are see if they can take the basket and tear it apart, and every country will get its own backed coin, currency to the currency. It will be a stable coin. In cryptocurrency volatile market, it's important to have stable coin. USDT, although
entirely,
it has a lot of
it's just very different from what they promised. If that's supposedly,
I don't think it's very different. They say it's going to be backed with a basket of currencies. So now it's just one currency at a country. But the main goal was to have the currency to their users, to WhatsApp users, to Facebook users, and to bank the unbanked. It's a wise thought of dealing with regulation that maybe did not understand the advantages in cryptocurrency, but it's not a change in the main goal of Libra.
And Mr. Lee, wondering with you, how much of a sidetracking is this? And again, it's a statement from David Marcus in a conference about possibly changing the essence of Libra as to not be backed by a basket of coins, rather stablecoin pegged to nation-state currencies. Do you think that's coming because of pressure from the regulators and the attempt just to make this happen no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just make an observation first that, the fact that Libra can change its design so flexibly does show you sort of why digital currencies are actually, quite attractive, because you can sort of change the nature of how it's architected, and it's not something that is set in stone and requires, a quorum of political members to approve. But, I think that what Libra is essentially going to do, if this is the way the project moves towards, is it's going to allow the users themselves to build their own basket of currencies, because they can, presumably use this Libra then to acquire other digital assets and build their own portfolio of what they think is a basket. So I think it works. And ultimately, the biggest thing is it's 2 billion users. And if you could introduce them to the idea of moving money digitally, it's really moving the ball forward.
It's a mass adoption like that, and I think that's something we all understand. I'm wondering with the two of you, as we near the end of this, Telegram itself, also the TON coin, so to speak, was big news last week. 2 weeks ago, when the SEC, some would argue, out of the blue, all of a sudden came out with a cease and desist letter for something that sources within Telegram said was completely agreed upon, that it's a utility. It stopped it at its heels. And now TON has postponed its launch. 1.7 billion, I think, dollars are sitting, waiting by investors to see what happens. Your take on that, Mr. Lee, because we were all. Let me put it forward. TON is a Russian project, so to speak. They kept saying that they don't give a damn, quote unquote, about regulation. But here they are capitulating to regulators. What is your take on that?
I mean, TON was one of the mega projects that raised money in 2018. EOS and Block One, and there have been a few others. But it was a huge amount of money raised. And I think it's important for people who are involved with TON or following this to understand that the SEC doesn't see TON any differently than Libra or Ethereum or what they've done with Block One. These aren't issues they're dealing with in silos, but they're treating it collectively. And I think it makes sense that they'd want to really kind of say, look, let's get the landscape cleared up and understand what's happening with Libra. And with EOS, the cat was already out of the bag. So I think in a way, there wasn't a way to sort of unwind that massive $4 billion sale. So I don't think it's a complete surprise for someone who's followed regulations. I was formerly a wireless analyst, and I followed regulations from 93 to 07 very closely. And I did some bankruptcy research as well at JP Morgan. So it doesn't surprise me. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a black eye for the industry. I think TON is obviously trying to create some sort of new project platform with the money they raised. We don't really have an insight, and it has nothing to do with Telegram itself, which is a great platform. So I think in some ways it's neither good or bad for the industry.
Yeah, fascinating to hear that one. Wondering with you also, Or, when it comes to TON, did that come as a surprise to you, that cease and desist letter?
Well, I was waiting for it to happen, actually.
What's taking you so long?
Yeah, how come the SEC is so involved with everything that it's either utility...
And you're not touching that, right?
Yeah. So they were too quiet about it, so I was wondering when it's going to happen. But is TON a utility, or is it a security? Is it going to produce profit for the investors? If yes, so the utility part is a problem.
Yeah. No. And but as Tom mentioned, it's so hard to know and figure that one out. Finally, folks, in recent years, we've seen regulators trying to regulate the crypto market. Mr. Lee, how do you see, or how do you think, regulation for this market? Because, which is not going away. And I think it's proven that it's not going away. How should that regulation look at? And can it move fast enough with the technology? Because there are those who would argue and criticize that when it comes to the SEC, they still adhere to, laws from the 40s. And that we have moved faster than that. And, how much regulation is needed? When will it happen? And are the regulators understanding that, is my question to you.
Yeah. I'm going to make an unpopular observation, but I think regulations are actually very good for cryptocurrencies. And they've actually, believe it or not, I believe the SEC's really served investors quite well, because what they are trying to do is not to try to limit regulation, but it's really to prevent the exploitation of individual investors. And I think anyone who looked at what happened in late 2017, 2018 and saw all the scams would really appreciate that the SEC can't just simply say, oh, well, it's a new space, let's just let people get scammed. And the risk obviously is causing or either innovation to take place outside the US or outright killing it. For instance, if there's a executive order banning Bitcoin, institutions also are going to be more attracted to an industry that's properly regulated and not strangulated. But I do think that the SEC hasn't harmed the industry by going slow. I think the most important, and again, another unpopular opinion, is really going to be the creation of an ETF. And I think that's years away, but to me, that is going to probably be the primary way we'll see institutions get involved, and it really create, I think, quite a lot of stability, because today Bitcoin is held by retail.
No, entirely. I'm so sorry for jumping in. You think that an ETF approval is years away?
Yes, we've written about this, and so our clients are aware that there's really two reasons we think it's years away. One is Bitcoin's size today is too small. As a under $200 billion network value, and with block rewards of only $5 or $10 million a day, an ETF is likely to generate close to $13 billion of demand the first year. And that's a massive demand imbalance to available supply. And so if you were to try to do an equilibrium price required, Bitcoin's price needs to be about $150,000 to be liquid enough to handle what would be expected to be an ETF. And the second is of course, really has to do with the SEC, that I don't think that they want their legacy to be deciding on a Bitcoin ETF. So I think that the current SEC chairman is really going to keep kicking the can down the road until either we have a new SEC chairman or the White House itself sort of changes its sort of overarching views around cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, I would venture and say, I don't know about Jay Clayton, but I don't think the White House right now would change its opinion. That said, or wondering with you, you think that an ETF is that necessary for this sphere?
Well, first of all, I want to say I couldn't agree more with everything you just said about regulation, the need of regulation for this market, and the value, the added value that regulation can bring to crypto markets.
Entirely.
Regarding
the ETF?
Well, it seems like, with what I can see up until now, that the SEC really does not care to make this decision. So if we're going to have to wait for a new chairman, or if we're going to have to wait for Libra to come over for a message adoption, or for maybe to some expanded volumes, then something's going to happen in order for them to take this decision. Because right now we can all see
far away from that.
They just don't want to make up their mind regarding to the ETF.
No, and that's where it stands. I'm wondering, if the only thing that'll change it if somebody on the other side of the globe moves faster than them. That said, Mr. Lee, I'm going to ask you, because we've taken so much of your time. At the end of the day, people who watch us, people who listen to us, and vice versa, and we do too, always wonder what will happen to the inception child of this sphere, Bitcoin right now, as we said, staving off somewhere around 8,000. Do you see it dropping more in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin, this is something we always advise our clients. What happens in the next few months won't have any bearing what happens in the next few years. But I think it's quite possible Bitcoin can weaken further because investors or holders of Bitcoin are getting quite nervous. So I think there's downside that's possible, but it probably ultimately becomes the buying opportunity that people need in front of the halvening. So I don't think it would be bad if Bitcoin drops.
You don't think it's going to be bad if Bitcoin drops?
Yeah, I think people will buy. I think there's a lot of dry powder on the sidelines, and a lot of people sitting on Tether or dollars are going to use it to buy some Bitcoin.
Fascinating. Ms. Lee, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today from New York City. Needless to say, the knowledge, the expertise, and I want to say you've been very careful in predictions, which I very much admire. Orla Kai-Koren, thank you for being with us as well. We cannot do this without you when we're looking at regulation. And this was it for us. Power Blocks, Block TV with Thomas Lee. And we'll be right back.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.